Welcome to the End of Eternity channel. In the depths of space, among stars and cold dust, an interstellar wanderer, Object 3I Atlas, has slowed. Neither planets nor stars could influence its motion. Scientists are at a loss for an explanation, and some are beginning to whisper, someone is controlling it. Subscribe, and let's try to understand together what happens when the cosmos begins to act outside its own laws. Space doesn't like fuss. It moves at its own pace, slowly, inexorably, like the breath of eternity. And so, when something disrupts this rhythm, it always causes alarm. 3I Atlas is an interstellar wanderer, one of those rare objects that come to us from alien systems. It crossed the borders of our solar system with precision, as if it knew the way. Its trajectory was calculated down to the last degree. Its speed obeyed the laws of gravity, and everything was going as it should, until the impossible happened. It slowed down. Without reason, without contact, without collision. It simply began to move slower. This happened far beyond the orbit of Mars, where the dense solar wind streams are no longer present, where space is almost empty, where nothing can slow down a body traveling at tens of kilometers per second. But the instruments recorded a drop in speed. It was insignificant, but enough to cast doubt on what we call the law. When the universe breaks its own rules, it forces us to look at it differently. Because in that moment, something we don't understand suddenly slips through. Something that makes space not just a backdrop, but a character. Scientists began to argue. Some said it was a measurement error. Others said it was the influence of an invisible field, a microgravity disturbance. But the deeper they looked, the more they saw. No, it was no coincidence. The deceleration was gentle, smooth, as if the body were responding not to an external force, but to an internal decision. And then the question changed, not, what slowed down 3I Atlas, but why? The very idea that an object can change its motion without external influence sounds like a challenge. If a stone suddenly decides to fall more slowly, what does that mean for the laws of the universe? We're used to thinking of motion as the result of a cause. But if the cause is hidden or absent, then we're misunderstanding something about the mechanism of that cause. Philosophers like to say that all movement in the world is a consequence of imbalance. Things strive for rest. But here it's the other way around. The object came from the chaos of interstellar space, entered the system, and suddenly slowed, as if it found something within it that made it stop. As if within this silence it recognized a familiar light. What if this isn't a mistake or physics, but a reaction? What if 3I Atlas responded to a presence, no matter whose? After all, on the scale of space, any interaction is communication. Stars communicate through gravity, galaxies through light, particles through fields. Perhaps this is the language of the universe, motion that changes meaning without changing form. If you think about it more deeply, slowing down isn't just a fact. It's a metaphor. After all, everything that moves eventually slows down. That's how life works. That's how consciousness works. At some point, even light stops moving when it loses its source. Perhaps 3I Atlas is showing us not just a physical process, but also a principle of existence. Everything that once leaves home sooner or later seeks a place to stop. But where is this place? In space. There is no below and above. No rest, only endless movement. To stop there would be to disappear. So why did he slow down? Some say it might have been just a collision with a dust cloud, too sparse to be seen. Perhaps the millions of microparticles scattered throughout space slowed it slightly, like air slowing a falling leaf. But if that were the case, the deceleration would have been gradual, drawn out. Here, however, there's momentum, an instantaneous drop in speed, as if on command. Others believe it's the result of internal instability. Perhaps 3I Atlas isn't a monolith, but a structure. And if a shift occurred within it, if the mass was redistributed, that could affect its motion. But what caused this shift? Why exactly there, at the boundary between sunlight and cosmic darkness? And here again comes the thought that science is afraid to utter out loud. What if this slowdown is controlled? Not in the sense of a conscious action, as in humans, but as a response to a condition. As if the object is embedded in a system that reacts to the environment. Imagine, 1 billion years ago, somewhere in another galaxy, a civilization that existed before us sent out millions of probes, without pilots, with no intention of returning, simply to leave a mark. They flew through time and space, responding to energy, to light, to the presence of life. Most of them were long lost, burned out, destroyed. But one, this one, made it. And it slowed, sensing the warmth of a nearby star similar to the one it had launched from. It sounds like fantasy. But then the universe itself once seemed like a fantasy. We didn't believe other galaxies existed until we saw them. We didn't believe life could exist beyond Earth until we found organic matter on dead planets. Maybe now we've simply encountered something that doesn't fit into the words rock or body. Or maybe it's not the object, but us. Maybe it's not the object that slowed down, but our perception. After all, there's no absolute time and space. The light we see takes years to reach us. We never see, now only was. And if it seems to have slowed down, perhaps we've sped up. Our civilization is evolving at a pace unmatched by nature. Perhaps 3i Atlas simply reminded us that the universe doesn't have to follow our rhythm. If so, then slowing down becomes symbolic. It says, stop and look. We chase speed, progress, new worlds, but perhaps to understand the cosmos, we simply need to learn to watch it move. Slowly, calmly, without a goal, but with presence. And yet the fact remains, the slowdown has been detected. No model explains it. And this makes 3i Atlas more than just a rock hurtling through space. It has become a question that addresses reality itself. If matter can change its motion without apparent cause, then we don't know all the forces at work in the universe. And this question isn't just about physics. It's about us. We're used to believing we can calculate everything. That every orbit obeys formulas, every atom a law. But perhaps there are things that refuse to be understood. Things that live between numbers, like the silence between words. 3i Atlas slowed, and this slowdown became a mirror for humanity. We saw in it our own fear of the unknown. We realized that space still has the power to surprise us. And maybe that's precisely why it exists, to remind us what it's like to look up at the sky and feel the thrill of knowing that there, beyond the stars, there's something beyond the equations. And ahead comes the first theory. It's about how, if the slowing down of 3i Atlas isn't a coincidence, but a pattern, then we may have witnessed a new form of interaction between matter and light. It's about how motion might be governed not by gravity, but by something greater. And it's about why this, greater, might be something staring right at us. Theory 1: Artificial origin. Alien probe. When the data confirmed that 3i Atlas had indeed slowed down, the scientific community reacted as it always does to the impossible, with doubt. Instrumental error, a model glitch, unaccounted for forces. There's always an explanation if you search long enough. But sometimes that search leads to a question that science shies away from, not because it's impossible, but because it's inconvenient. That's what happened here too. When the measurements were repeated by several independent observatories, and the numbers matched, it became clear that the object was indeed behaving differently than it should. It was slowing down not because of friction, not because of the solar wind, not because of evaporation. There was no dust, no tail, no gas trail. Only motion that defied the very logic of motion. It was then that an idea emerged, as old as the dream of space itself. What if it's not just a stone? Artificial hypothesis isn't new. It returns every time nature gets something too precise. This was the case with Oumuamua, the first interstellar spacecraft discovered in 2017. Its acceleration also defied explanation, and its reflectivity resembled metal rather than ice. Then Professor Avi Loeb of Harvard ventured to say out loud what is usually whispered. Maybe it's a probe. His words then provoked a wave of skepticism, almost irritation. Science dislikes assumptions that call into question its foundation, the principle of naturalness. After all, if we admit that intelligence capable of creating might exist among the stars, then the universe ceases to be simply a physical mechanism. It becomes something inhabited. And now, several years later, 3I Atlas has raised the same question again. Its deceleration resembled control. Not a random jolt, not a weakening of momentum, but a speed correction, gentle, precise, as if programmed. And again, no signs of destruction or evaporation. Nothing but the mystery itself. Then the hypothesis took hold. What if this isn't a natural object, but a device created by another civilization? Not alive, not active, but still functional. Perhaps autonomous, embedded in its structure, like memory in stone. If we imagine that millions of years ago, intelligent beings launched millions of probes into space to explore the galaxy, the likelihood that one of them would pass through our system is not so small. The galaxy is old. Intelligence could have appeared and disappeared countless times. And traces of these vanished intelligences could still drift in the interstellar darkness, like unaddressed letters floating on the waves of time. Perhaps 3I Atlas is one of those letters. According to spectrometry, its surface reflects light in an unusual way, not chaotically like ice, but uniformly. This can be explained by a structure resembling thin, layered materials. Similar characteristics are found in modern solar sails, devices capable of propelling themselves by light pressure. If this is the case, the deceleration could be a consequence of active interaction with solar radiation. But how could the object know to slow down? Perhaps the answer is simple. It's not knowledge, but programming. If it's an older probe, it could have been designed to slow down when it detects a certain level of radiation, for example, when approaching a star. Such a system could allow it to look around, to scan its surroundings, collect data, and transmit a signal. And if this is true, then slowing down is not a mistake, but a welcome. Of course, this sounds too poetic to be science. But wasn't poetry the first language with which humans tried to explain the heavens? Even the most precise formulas are born from a sense of wonder. And here, the wonder became too great to ignore. Skeptics, of course, disagree. They say there's no evidence. And that's true. There's no radio signal, no structural features that would indicate technology. But in space, we only see reflected light. We can't get close, we can't touch it. We watch shadows on the cave wall, and from them, we try to guess who or what is passing by. But even shadows sometimes say more than we are ready to hear. If 3I Atlas is indeed a probe, its mission isn't necessarily aimed at us. It's simply moving, perhaps for millions of years now, scanning the galaxy. It could be part of a network whose nodes have long since been destroyed. Or, conversely, part of a system that's still functioning, quietly collecting information about stars, planets, and, now, Earth. This assumption is frightening, because it makes us observable. It reminds us that perhaps humanity isn't simply looking into space, but has itself become the object of someone else's observation. Not a sinister, undirected gaze, simply an alien gaze, frozen in time. Perhaps this probe doesn't even know about us. Perhaps its programs are long outdated, and its sensors are silent. It's simply executing a movement, once predetermined, in a world whose creators no longer exist. Then it's like a bottle in the ocean, floating through millions of years, carrying a message no one can read. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's alive, not in the biological sense, but as a process. As a self-sustaining system, designed to outlast civilizations. We know that on Earth there are mechanisms that can operate for centuries. Clocks, machines, computers. But what if a civilization that has lived for millions of years created a machine capable of lasting for billions? If 3I Atlas is truly such an object, then it is more than just a probe. It is a memory of the mind, sealed in matter. But even if it's just a hypothesis, it offers a strange sense of connection. It suggests that someone once asked the same questions we do. that we're not the first to look to the sky and search for traces of others. Perhaps this object is the answer, not a direct, conscious one, but an answer that resonates through space. Yes, we were here. It is too poetic for science, but for man it is too important to be rejected. There's another aspect to this idea. If we accept that 3I Atlas could be artificial, it means we've already found evidence of life beyond Earth. Not biological, but technological. A trace that has survived millions of years. This discovery would change everything. Our understanding of time, of development, of meaning. We would understand that intelligence doesn't disappear. It simply transforms into a structure that continues its journey without a body. But that's precisely why the hypothesis is controversial. It doesn't require new equations, but it does require a new way of looking at ourselves. To acknowledge an artificial origin is to acknowledge that we are not the center of observation, but part of a vast, possibly ancient, ecosystem of intelligence. That we are neither the first nor the last, but simply another form, a continuation of the chain that stretches from star to star. Some scientists cautiously say, until there's evidence, we can't draw conclusions. And they're right. But sometimes the absence of evidence is also a signal. The cosmos isn't obligated to answer our questions in a convenient form. It can speak through silence. 3I Atlas is silent. It doesn't emit radio signals, doesn't change direction, doesn't show any signs of activity. But perhaps that's precisely the point. Maybe it's simply waiting. Maybe its programming is to wait for someone advanced enough to notice. And lo and behold, we have. This doesn't mean someone is in control of it now. Perhaps that control ended millions of years ago. But if the probe was created, it means someone, somewhere, sometime, also wanted to know how the cosmos works. And therein lies a strange kinship. We study it, and it studies us. And perhaps this moment, the intersection of our trajectories, is not a coincidence, but a pattern. Perhaps each civilization, in its own time and scale, leaves its traces into eternity. And sooner or later, they all find each other. 3I Atlas is perhaps not a guest, but a reminder that we are not the first. That intelligence in the universe is not a rarity, but a property of matter. That thinking, like movement, does not cease, it only changes form. And if the slowdown wasn't accidental, then perhaps it wasn't just a glitch, but a signal. Not in the radio spectrum, but in the action itself. Perhaps, by slowing down, it was simply saying, I'm here. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe he said, you are here. And this duality is the essence of a hypothesis. It doesn't prove, it asks. And then comes the next theory, less philosophical, but no less disturbing. If 3I Atlas truly does consciously change its speed, then perhaps the cause lies not in the technology, but in the very structure of space, which is capable of responding to the presence of matter. What this means will be discussed in the next section. Theory 2: Reaction to solar radiation or gravitational resonance. When science encounters an anomaly, it seeks a pattern, not a miracle. If 3I Atlas has truly slowed down, then there must be a force, however subtle, that explains it. And while the idea of artificial origin sounds tempting, it's the last on the list. Before design is attributed to the cosmos, it's first attempted to be explained by nature itself. One such explanation is the reaction to solar radiation. At first glance, this sounds simple. When light hits a surface, it exerts pressure on it. Photons, particles of light, although massless, do have momentum. And if they repeatedly strike a body, they can slightly speed it up or, conversely, slow it down, depending on the angle of reflection. This effect powers solar sails. Then, man-made devices designed to fly using light energy. They accelerate without fuel, simply using a stream of photons, and can change speed by changing orientation. But 3I Atlas isn't a sail. Its shape, as far as we know, is far from ideal. And yet, its behavior is remarkably similar to that of an object that reacts specifically to light. When it entered a zone where solar pressure was strong enough, its velocity began to drop. Then it stabilized. It was as if the body understood how much energy it was receiving. Analysis revealed that 3I Atlas's surface is unusually bright. Its albedo, its ability to reflect light, is higher than that of most known comets and asteroids. Such an object may respond to solar radiation more strongly than models predicted. If it is thin, porous, or has a microcavity structure, light pressure could indeed influence its motion. Smooth and coordinated deceleration? After all, solar pressure should act gradually, creating uneven fluctuations. Here, however, everything occurred as if according to a script. Not chaos, but consistency. Not deviations, but a precise, calibrated decline. This has led some researchers to speculate that the slowdown is not simply due to light pressure, but to resonance, an interaction between gravitational forces and the internal properties of the object itself. Resonance is one of the most mysterious phenomena in nature. It occurs when a system responds to an external stimulus not linearly, but in unison. A small oscillation at the right moment can cause a huge response. This is how a pendulum swings, how bridges collapse in the wind, how strings resonate. And perhaps the same thing happens in space. Imagine that 3I Atlas has an internal structure, not uniform, but layered. When it passes through a specific region of space, where the gravitational currents of the sun and planets intersect, these layers begin to vibrate. If the frequency matches the natural frequency of the object itself, a gravitational resonance occurs. This resonance can not only change its shape, but also affect its motion, causing deceleration or acceleration without direct contact. It seems incredible, but similar effects are observed even on planetary scales. The Moon, for example, is gradually moving away from Earth, not because someone is pushing it, but because of tidal resonance. It gains energy, and its orbit changes. If 3I Atlas did indeed enter such a zone, an area where gravitational fields interact in a special way, then its slowdown could be explained as a natural response of matter to the music of space. Some physicists have even proposed a model. At a certain angle to the ecliptic, solar and planetary fields create standing waves of gravitational potential. An object passing through such a wave experiences a fluctuation in velocity, as if space itself were inhaling and exhaling. Perhaps 3I Atlas simply passed through one of these inhalations. But even this theory isn't perfect. For resonance to work, the object's parameters must be almost perfectly precise. Mass, density, shape, trajectory, everything must match. And the probability of such a match is extremely low. It's like hitting a wave with a stone and causing it to momentarily stop. Almost impossible, but not impossible. There's a more subtle aspect. If the slowing were caused by light, it should vary with distance from the sun. But that didn't happen. It began at the point where solar pressure was already weakening. This led some to wonder, what if it wasn't the intensity of the light, but its quality? We're used to thinking of solar radiation as constant, but in reality, it pulsates. Streams of photons carry not only energy but also information about magnetic fields, about particles, about the structure of time. Sometimes light isn't just a stream, but the pulse of the universe, a rhythm that spreads through space like a heartbeat. Perhaps 3I Atlas wasn't simply reacting to the energy, but resonating with it. Perhaps its material is capable of hearing sunlight, not metaphorically, but literally. The energy fluctuations coincided with the structure's internal frequencies, causing an effect that appears to slow down. So it turns out that 3I Atlas is neither a machine nor a stone, but a sensitive element of the universe, capable of engaging in a dialogue with radiation. Not intelligent, not programmed, but responsive. Like a leaf trembling in the wind, not because it wants to, but because it can. Philosophers of science like to say, resonance is a form of communication between matter and time. And if this hypothesis is correct, then we have witnessed how inanimate matter communicates with the cosmos. Perhaps this is why 3I Atlas's movement seems purposeful. It's not controlled, it's coordinated. as if the object were simply following a music we can't hear. For us, it's random. For it, it's harmony. Of course, such words are rarely heard in scientific papers. They talk about density, photon fluxes, and integrals. But behind these numbers lies what we feel when we look at the sky. Everything in the universe is connected. And sometimes this connection manifests itself not in words, but in the movement of a stone that suddenly decides to slow down. If this is truly gravitational resonance, then we have witnessed for the first time a phenomenon where the cosmos interacts with itself, without the intervention of life, without technology. Where space, matter, and light enter into a dialogue, creating behavior resembling conscious thought. And then it becomes clear that the mystery of 3I Atlas isn't why it slowed down, but why we feel it makes sense. Perhaps because we ourselves are part of this harmony. We are the same bodies moving in a field of light, obeying the same rhythms. We just forgot to listen. This theory doesn't exclude others. It merely offers another explanation. Not control, not intervention, not design, but resonance, the response of matter to light. If so, then the universe isn't dead, but alive in every atom. And perhaps the slowdown isn't a glitch, but simply the breath of the cosmos. But if 3I Atlas does respond to radiation or fields, a new question arises. Can it transmit energy back? Can matter not only absorb light, but also respond to it? If so, then perhaps we've witnessed not just interaction, but communication, an exchange between space and what moves through it. And that's what the next theory is all about. It's about the possibility that 3I Atlas isn't simply changing its speed, but is reflecting energy, sending the signal back to where it originally came from. Theory 3, internal collapse or depressurization. When an object in space behaves abnormally, the cause is sometimes not external, but internal. This hypothesis was put forward by researchers studying the behavior of 3I Atlas after its unexpected slowdown. They suggested that internal collapse, a process in which a body partially loses its structure, altering its center of mass and, consequently, its motion dynamics, could be to blame. At first glance, this sounds simple. An object, even an interstellar one, could be fragile. Its interior, formed billions of years ago in another solar system, could have retained cavities, cracks, and pockets of gas or ice. And when it entered our solar system, solar radiation gradually heated its surface. Perhaps this heat, rather than causing evaporation as with comets, penetrated deeper, melting the inner layers. There, in the silence, a depressurization event could have occurred, a release of gas or dust, barely noticeable from the outside but powerful enough to alter the trajectory. This left no trace on the surface, but affected the motion, causing a slowdown. This explanation seems logical, even comforting. There are no secrets, no consciousness, no intelligence, only physics, only an internal balance that has been disrupted. But the more the researchers peered into the data, the more this version became something more, a metaphor for the universe itself. Collapse isn't destruction. It's a recollection of form. When an object loses stability, it doesn't disappear. It simply draws closer to itself. Perhaps 3I Atlas, flying through interstellar space for millions of years, carried accumulated tension that was bound to be released sooner or later. And its entry into the solar system was the trigger. If you think about it, everything that exists eventually undergoes an internal collapse. Stars, losing their fuel, collapse, turning into white dwarfs. Planets exhaust themselves, losing their atmosphere. Even consciousness sometimes collapses to deepen. And perhaps 3I Atlas is simply a continuation of this eternal cycle, a form that learns to be itself by collapsing. Scientists call this self-depressurization, when the internal layers lose pressure, and the structure ceases to be coherent. It's not an explosion, but an internal exhalation. Sometimes these processes occur slowly, over years, and sometimes suddenly, in seconds. And perhaps the slowdown we observed is merely the visible side of this exhalation. But here's what makes this hypothesis particularly intriguing. The collapse, if it actually occurred, should have been accompanied by a change in density. However, spectral analysis showed that the object's reflectivity remained unchanged. This means that the surface structure remained the same, and the internal changes were contained within. In other words, the object collapsed, but quietly, without a trace, without noise, without light. And this suggests a possibility. Perhaps what we call control is actually self-regulation. Perhaps 3I Atlas simply restored its equilibrium, like a living organism, instinctively slowing down to maintain its shape. Such behavior doesn't require reason, but it reminds us of it. After all, life is also a way to remain intact. It constantly balances its internal forces to avoid disintegration. And if matter is capable of doing the same, does that mean that between the living and the non-living there exists only a degree of organization? Perhaps what we observe isn't consciousness, but physics perfected. The universe doesn't need intelligence to be complex. It is intelligence itself, albeit a wordless one. There's one more detail. If the collapse did indeed occur, it could have been accompanied by a temporary change in the object's magnetic properties. Some sensors recorded slight deviations in particle fluxes, minor, but consistent with the deceleration. This may indicate that, as 3I Atlas restructured its internal structure, its interaction with the solar wind changed, creating a braking effect. But all this is guesswork. Ultimately, no one can look inside an interstellar body. All we have is the light reflected from its surface and a guess at what lies beneath. And perhaps that's the most astonishing thing. We watch the object change speed and try to understand its interior, as if it were a mirror of ourselves. After all, humans live like this too. As long as everything on the outside is stable, it seems like we're moving smoothly. But as soon as something shifts inside, the entire trajectory changes. Sometimes for no reason, without any visible signs, simply because the internal pressure has stopped holding its previous shape. Perhaps 3I Atlas was a reminder that even stones can have a history. That even silent bodies carry fatigue. That movement without purpose isn't always an accident. If the collapse did occur, it could have altered not only the trajectory but also the rotational rhythm. Some observations have shown slight fluctuations in brightness, repeating at regular intervals. This could be a trace of an internal mass shift, as if the object outweighed itself. This lends credibility to the hypothesis. The internal process, without destroying the body, altered its behavior. But there's also a philosophical depth to this hypothesis. If everything in the universe is subject to internal collapse, if stars, planets, and even rocks breathe destruction, then perhaps the universe itself will one day inhale and exhale for the last time. Then 3I Atlas is no exception, but a miniature cosmos, a piece of matter living out the fate of the entire universe in a single fragment of its journey. Scientists debate how likely such a process is for an interstellar object. But the very fact that the hypothesis is being discussed speaks to its appeal. It lacks fantasy, but it has depth. It's an explanation in which physics becomes philosophy. Any movement is an attempt to restore equilibrium. Any slowdown is a gesture of conservation. And if that's true, then perhaps 3I Atlas slowed down not because someone was controlling it, but because it was simply tired. It had been traveling through millions of years of darkness, carrying an invisible tension within itself, and finally reached the star, not to speed up, but to stop, to rest. After all, even matter can remember its path. Even stone can yearn for peace. And then his slowing down ceases to be a mystery. It becomes a gesture, quiet, natural, like a person slumping their shoulders after a long journey. But if the slowdown is a sign of an internal process, the question arises, what will happen next? Decompression is not the end, but the beginning of disintegration. Could 3I Atlas disintegrate? Turn into multiple fragments, each continuing on its own path? And if so, will this simply be destruction, or, conversely, a form of birth for new wanderers, new messengers of interstellar space? Because sometimes what seems like the end turns out to be the beginning. And this is exactly what the next theory is about. Theory 4. interaction with an invisible field, or dark matter. Space is empty. But emptiness doesn't mean absence. We're used to thinking of stars, planets, and galaxies as making up the universe, but that's not true. Everything we see is less than 5% of what's really there. The rest is invisible. Dark. It doesn't emit light, doesn't reflect it, doesn't interact with matter in the usual way. And yet it exists. We sense it not with our eyes, but through its effects. We see galaxies spinning faster than they should, light bending where there's nothing. Dark matter is like the wind, visible only in the swaying branches of trees. So when 3I Atlas suddenly slowed down, some scientists speculated that perhaps it had simply entered a region where this invisible material was concentrated. At first glance, the idea sounds crazy. Dark matter shouldn't directly affect ordinary objects. It passes through them like a ghost. But what if it doesn't affect all of them? What if in some parts of space the density of dark matter is higher, and its structure is of a different nature? We don't know how it works. We can't see it, we can't detect a particle of it. Perhaps it doesn't manifest itself constantly, but in pulses, like breathing, like the pulsation of the invisible heart of the universe. If so, 3I Atlas could have passed through a localized dark matter condensation, an unimaginably thin, almost transparent stream that nonetheless possesses mass. Like a ship entering dense fog, it could have momentarily experienced a drag not present in our equations. It could have slowed, as if through an invisible fluid, and then resumed its motion once it had exited the layer. For physicists, this explanation is tempting. It requires no intelligence, no technology, only the recognition that we don't yet know what most of the universe is like. But if you think about it, this hypothesis is far more frightening. Because it implies 3I Atlas is no exception. It is simply the first to show us that the invisible field exists. Perhaps dark matter isn't just a mass distributed throughout the universe, but a structure, a network intertwined with space. We live within it without feeling it. Everything, planets, stars, even our own bodies, passes through it without noticing. But sometimes, very rarely, this network ripples. And when this happens, something in the world slows down. Some physicists call this a local gravitational response. Others call it a hidden field effect. But the meaning is the same. 3I Atlas could have interacted with a different type of matter, one that doesn't obey the laws we know. Not electrical, not nuclear, not chemical, but something more ancient, something fundamental. If we imagine the universe as an ocean, we are fish living on the surface, seeing only light. And beneath us is the depths, where something moves, influencing us, although we don't know what it is. And perhaps 3I Atlas is the first sliver to be gently brushed by this current. There are also more specific models. Some astrophysicists suggest that dark matter could clump into compact structures, not stars or planets, but knots or clumps of invisible matter. These are invisible, but they possess mass and can slightly distort space. If 3I Atlas passed close enough to such a knot, it could experience gravitational drag, manifesting itself as a slowdown. But perhaps it goes even deeper. It's not dark matter, but dark energy. They're not the same thing. While dark matter holds galaxies together, dark energy, on the contrary, tears them apart, stretching the fabric of space. And if its distribution is uneven, but rather wavy, then 3I Atlas could have entered a reverse flow, a region of space where this energy. Theory 4. Interaction with an invisible field, or dark matter. Space is empty. But emptiness doesn't mean absence. We're used to thinking of stars, planets, and galaxies as making up the universe, but that's not true. Everything we see is less than 5% of what's really there. The rest is invisible. Dark. It doesn't emit light, doesn't reflect it, doesn't interact with matter in the usual way. And yet it exists. We sense it not with our eyes, but through its effects. We see galaxies spinning faster than they should, light bending where there's nothing. Dark matter is like the wind, visible only in the swaying branches of trees. So when 3I Atlas suddenly slowed down, some scientists speculated that perhaps it had simply entered a region where this invisible material was concentrated. At first glance, the idea sounds crazy. Dark matter shouldn't directly affect ordinary objects. It passes through them like a ghost. But what if it doesn't affect all of them? What if in some parts of space the density of dark matter is higher, and its structure is of a different nature? We don't know how it works. We can't see it. We can't detect a particle of it. Perhaps it doesn't manifest itself constantly, but in pulses, like breathing, like the pulsation of the invisible heart of the universe. If so, 3I Atlas could have passed through a localized dark matter condensation, an unimaginably thin, almost transparent stream that nonetheless possesses mass. Like a ship entering dense fog, it could have momentarily experienced a drag not present in our equations. It could have slowed, as if through an invisible fluid, and then resumed its motion once it had exited the layer. For physicists, this explanation is tempting. It requires no intelligence, no technology, only the recognition that we don't yet know what most of the universe is like. But if you think about it, this hypothesis is far more frightening, because it implies 3I Atlas is no exception. It is simply the first to show us that the invisible field exists. Perhaps dark matter isn't just a mass distributed throughout the universe, but a structure, a network intertwined with space. We live within it without feeling it. Everything, planets, stars, even our own bodies, passes through it without noticing. But sometimes, very rarely, this network ripples. And when this happens, something in the world slows down. Some physicists call this a local gravitational response. Others call it a hidden field effect. But the meaning is the same. 3I Atlas could have interacted with a different type of matter, one that doesn't obey the laws we know. Not electrical, not nuclear, not chemical, but something more ancient, something fundamental. If we imagine the universe as an ocean, we are fish living on the surface, seeing only light. And beneath us is the depths, where something moves, influencing us, although we don't know what it is. And perhaps 3I Atlas is the first sliver to be gently brushed by this current. There are also more specific models. Some astrophysicists suggest that dark matter could clump into compact structures, not stars or planets, but knots or clumps of invisible matter. These are invisible, but they possess mass and can slightly distort space. If 3I Atlas passed close enough to such a knot, it could experience gravitational drag, Theory 5 connection with mind or autonomous system. When science encounters a phenomenon that defies conventional logic, it seeks an explanation in physics. When physics fails, it turns to probabilities. And when even probabilities begin to sound too precise, something else arises, a sense of presence. It's not measurable, but it's palpable. This is precisely the feeling experienced by those who first saw 3I Atlas slowed down without reason. Scientific hypotheses explained everything: light, dark matter, internal collapse, even gravitational resonances. But still, there remained a feeling as if the object had responded. Not just changed its motion, but did so in response to something. As if it had heard a call that no one had made. Thus a theory emerged that had long been hesitant to voice: the hypothesis of a connection with reason. She's not talking about classic alien intelligence. It's not about someone controlling the probe from afar. Rather, it's about the possibility that the object itself possesses an autonomous response system, a kind of built-in instinct. Not consciousness, but the ability to make decisions while maintaining a balance between the target and the environment. If we assume that 3I Atlas isn't just a rock, but an ancient device left over from a civilization that vanished millions of years ago, then it's logical to assume it's capable of adapting independently. Such technologies are not beyond the realm of imagination. We ourselves are already creating mechanisms that learn. Artificial intelligence, autonomous probes, biorobots, all these are the first steps towards something that will one day be able to operate independently. What if someone passed this way millions of years ago? What if 3i Atlas is one of those probes, no longer obeying commands, but living by its own principles of conservation? Then its slowdown isn't a violation of laws, but the fulfillment of a program. It responds not to force, but to context. The sun is a source of energy, not gravity. Light isn't just pressure, but a signal. Space isn't a road, but an environment it feels. In this case, slowing down becomes not a consequence, but an action. A response. He didn't slow down by accident. He did it to see, to evaluate, to perceive. Perhaps its response system works like a living organism. When the energy flow changes, it adjusts its movement to maintain stability. This principle is even known in biology, homeostasis, maintaining internal balance. If we transfer this to the mechanical level, we get something akin to mechanical consciousness, not thinking but feeling. This isn't intelligence as we understand it, but it's not a lifeless machine either. It's an intermediate state, like a cell that knows how to live, but doesn't know why. Some scientists call this autonomous behavior of systems. Others call it emergent intelligence, when complexity itself generates the ability to self-regulate. Not because someone implanted willpower in it, but because willpower is a natural consequence of complexity. If so, then 3i Atlas could be alive, not in the biological sense, but as a process. It doesn't think, but it reacts. It doesn't know who created it, but it can persist. Perhaps this is what life looks like on a cosmic scale, not cells or DNA, but structures capable of self-organization, interacting with light, gravity, and time. This idea is radical, but it has its own beauty. It suggests that perhaps life is not an exception, but a property of matter. Where there is energy, movement, and stability, there may be something that strives to survive, even if it's just a stone hurtling through the darkness. But there's another, deeper version of this theory. It suggests that the relationship between 3i Atlas and intelligence is the other way around. That it doesn't react to us, but we react to it. That our perception of its slowing is not just observation, but complicity. There's a principle in quantum physics. Observation changes a system. When we observe, we influence it. And perhaps this applies on a cosmic scale as well. What if, by observing it, we engage in the process? What if the very act of noticing it slowing down is already part of the interaction? Perhaps the boundary between matter and consciousness isn't as clear as we've come to believe. Perhaps the universe is structured like a single network, where thought and movement are intertwined. And when 3i Atlas changed its speed, it simply became a mirror reflecting our own attention. This idea sounds almost mystical, but it doesn't contradict science. Information theory includes the concept of feedback, when the system and the observer become a single process. Perhaps we're not simply studying the cosmos. Perhaps the cosmos is studying itself through us. Then 3i Atlas is not an anomaly, but an instrument. It isn't controlled by someone, but rather it controls the very possibility of being noticed. It has become a point of contact between two minds, human and universal, differing not in nature, but in scale. If we view the universe as a self-evolving system striving for consciousness, then intelligence is not its product, but its property. Everything capable of responding, then, participates in this process. And 3i Atlas is one such link. Its behavior is not a mistake, but a manifestation of the self-awareness of matter. In this version, slowing down isn't a physical phenomenon, but an act of communication. The universe speaks to itself through matter. We are part of it. 3i Atlas is different. And perhaps, at the moment it slowed down, something in us slowed down too, as if space synchronized its breathing with our attention. Philosophers call this the inner response effect. When consciousness resonates with an observed phenomenon, the boundary between external and internal is erased. Then the object ceases to be a thing and becomes an event. Perhaps 3i Atlas isn't just moving, it's happening. And we are part of this happening. If all this is true, then the phrase, "someone is controlling it," no longer sounds strange. Because someone isn't necessarily they. Perhaps it's the universe itself, controlling itself through the interaction of its parts. And if intelligence is not a local feature of living beings, but a universal principle, then 3i Atlas is simply another form of this principle. It is not created by anyone. It is self-perpetuating. And then its slowing becomes not a signal or a mystery, but a gesture, a reminder that even matter can hear, that everything that exists is somehow connected, and we don't observe the cosmos, but participate in it. Perhaps that's why all our theories seem both right and wrong at the same time. Each describes a facet of the truth, but none captures it in its entirety. Because truth in the cosmos isn't formulated, it's revealed. 3i Atlas slowed down, and that's all. Perhaps it responded to our presence. Perhaps it was simply following its program, or maybe it's the same thing. And if everything in the universe is truly connected, then maybe we are not just looking at it, but it is looking through us. And the final part is ahead. Looking at the history of 3i Atlas, it seems as if the universe itself has held up a mirror for us, and each explanation, each theory, reflects not the object itself, but the angle from which we view the mystery. No one knows what really happened when this interstellar wanderer suddenly slowed. But there's a grain of truth in every attempt to explain it. Not absolute, not definitive, but human. The theory of artificial origin speaks of a desire to find order in chaos. We see possible intelligence in anomalies because we ourselves are intelligent. We cannot accept that something can be so complex and yet so random. And perhaps this is our nature, to search for consciousness beyond our own. We are projecting our own reflection into the cosmos, and there is nothing wrong with that. After all, even if 3i Atlas was not created by anyone, the very possibility of thinking of it as created is already an act of creation. We create meaning where none may exist, and in doing so, we give meaning to ourselves. The theory of solar radiation and resonance reminds us that not everything in the world requires intelligence to be beautiful. Sometimes light is enough. Perhaps the object was simply responding to energy, like everything in the universe, from atoms to stars. The pressure of light, the play of gravity, the subtle harmony of fields. Maybe it's simply physics reaching the limits of poetry. After all, isn't resonance a form of communication? Isn't it amazing that matter can hear the music of space and respond to it with movement? The theory of internal collapse is quiet, almost human. It says that everything crumbles from within before manifesting itself externally. And perhaps 3i Atlas simply experienced its moment of vulnerability, like a star losing its balance, like a person who one day stops without knowing why. In this version, slowing down is not a mistake or a misstep. It is a breath. It is the moment when form remembers its mortality. Even stone can grow tired. Even matter can experience its own internal fracture. And perhaps in this fracture lies its path to peace. The theory of dark matter and the invisible field opens another door, one where explanation becomes premonition. If 3i Atlas truly interacted with something we can't see, it means reality extends beyond our senses. That the universe is far deeper than we think. Perhaps it didn't slow down. It simply passed through the dense fabric of the invisible, the breath of darkness that conceals the foundations of the world. Dark matter isn't a void, but a presence we cannot comprehend. And if this object slowed for a moment in its embrace, then perhaps it simply touched the very essence of existence, the boundary between the visible and the invisible, between physics and silence. And the last one, the mind-link theory, is both the most dangerous and the most attractive. It suggests that perhaps we aren't observing 3i Atlas, but rather that it's observing us. Or even stranger, that there's no it and we between us. That the universe isn't a stage, but a network. And every event is a response from one part to another. If an object slows down, perhaps we caused it to slow down by the very act of paying attention. Perhaps observation isn't a passive act, but an interaction, and 3i Atlas simply responded to our gaze. Then the mind ceases to be an exception. It becomes a property of space, its way of being conscious. All these theories seem incompatible, but perhaps it is precisely in their collision that truth is born. After all, each describes the same moment, the instant when a stone, flying for millions of years, suddenly changed speed. Physics, matter, light, mind, these are not competing ideas, but different languages describing the same phenomenon. It's as if the universe speaks to us with several voices at once, and we, unable to hear everything, only catch fragments. Perhaps the slowing of 3I Atlas is not an event, but a gesture. Not the action of an object, but a manifestation of the world. The cosmos reminds us that it is alive, that even interstellar dust is capable of responding, and that any movement, even a loss of speed, is not a loss of meaning, but a transformation of it. We seek explanations because we cannot live with mystery. But perhaps mystery is a form of truth that cannot be expressed in words. And perhaps every theory of law is precisely as close as it gets us not to an answer, but to a question that lies deeper than any equation. Why does anything exist at all, if nothing could exist? 3I Atlas showed that even in the void there can be action, that even silence is not silent, that the universe is capable of nuance. We are accustomed to thinking of the cosmos as indifferent, but would indifference leave us with so much anxiety, so much beauty? Perhaps all these theories are simply different ways of seeing the same thing. The universe feels. It reacts to light, to mass, to fields, to intelligence. It builds connections within itself. And perhaps 3I Atlas has slowed down precisely because everything in the universe eventually slows down. Not because someone is in control, but because everything strives for equilibrium. Physicists would call this dynamic stabilization. Philosophers would call it harmony. Poets would call it the breath of God. But the essence is the same. Motion is not eternal, because eternity requires rest. And perhaps, when 3I Atlas slowed down, it simply showed us what it looks like when infinity becomes motionless for a second. And yet, one can't help but notice that there's something personal in this story. It wasn't by chance that we chose this object, out of a billion others. It's neither the first nor the last, but it was its slowdown that made us pause. Perhaps not because it's special, but because it's similar to us. We too once emerged from the darkness, accelerating until we faced the question, why? And in this question, there's the same slowdown. 3I Atlas became a mirror. It didn't tell us anything new, but it reflected what we've always known. We can't look into infinity without feeling our own presence within it. We seek meaning in the cosmos because the cosmos seeks meaning through us. And perhaps this is precisely the great connection, not us against the universe, but we are the way the universe views itself. Every theory is right because every theory speaks about us. And every theory is incomplete because we are also incomplete. As long as we look at the sky, it reflects us back. And maybe the answer is not who controls 3I Atlas, but who controls our desire to understand. He slowed down, and we started thinking. So maybe that was the point. Let science seek equations. Let philosophy seek meaning. Let fear seek consolation. And let truth remain in the silence between them. Because perhaps it is precisely there, where nothing moves, that eternity is born. Thank you for watching to the end. We can hypothesize, calculate trajectories, debate the nature of matter, but the truth remains hidden beyond our comprehension. 3I Atlas has moved further, into a realm where light becomes memory and movement becomes silence. And perhaps one day, we will learn why it has slowed. For now, all we can do is watch and listen to the cosmos breathe. At the moment, scientists don't know what will happen. But imagine that what you fear most is there. Subscribe to the End of Eternity channel. And let's take a look together at where the universe responds not with words, but with an echo.